Hola, bienvenidos, hello, and welcome to Latinx YC, where we discuss the good, the bad, and the ugly of U.S. politics from a Latino, Latina, and Latinx perspective. My name is Clemencia Herrera, and I am founder of Moira Studio, a cross-cultural advertising agency that works with progressive political campaigns, organizations, and advocacy initiatives to engage with Latino audiences exactly how they deserve, with an authentic and caring way. Hello.
Hello, and I'm Cecilia del Cid. I'm an environmental and social justice practitioner. I'm an immigrant from Guatemala, community weaver, working in media as well. Nice to see you, Hermosa.
Missed you, girl.
I know.
It's been too long.
I know. And today,
to kick off our season 4, we are very honored to have Angelia Razo, the Texas State Director for the Political Action Committee, Mi Familia Vota. Welcome.
Great to be here with you, Clemencia and Cecilia.
bienvenida.
Thank you. Bienvenida. Angelica joined Mi Familia Vota in 2017 to lead the organization's youth leadership program in Houston. She currently serves as the Texas State Director, where she oversees the state's operations to increase political representation and power for the Latinx community. Yes! Through electoral advocacy and community organizing strategies. Her strong belief in community empowerment motivates her to engage others so they can find their own unique civic role while participating in collective action. Love all this. And Angelica has always been passionate about contributing to advocacy and engagement efforts that lead to sustainable and equitable solutions for her community. She's mostly interested in issues regarding access to democracy, yes, gender equity, yes, and climate justice.
Yes.
I know Ceci would really like that one too.
Yes.
Welcome so much. What an honor to have you here, and such an amazing mission that you have.
Yes, no, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited for the conversation that we're about to have, and I'm just really ready to speak honestly about what is happening in Texas, what is Texas, and what's up ahead for Texas.
Yes. So let's talk about Texas. I feel like most of the times, and I think, movies have perpetuated this image, and also the media. People in the rest of the country think of Texas as like a bunch of cowboy types, like white conservative Americans, like Anglo-Americans, right? And in talking about this episode, you said that the reality couldn't be farther from that. So can you speak a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So just we always love to remind people that Texas was once part of Mexico. So there are family members here that can still trace their lineage back to when one day they were living in Mexico and the next day they were living in the United States when Texas joined the nation. And so it is so important to just highlight that you can't talk about Texas history without talking about Latin American history. That ever since we formed as a state, we've been becoming increasingly diverse, and that comes with a lot of Latin American heritage and culture, and it comes from heritages from all over the world. I'm based in Houston, the most diverse city in the United States, and we say that with pride and recognize that we need to do more for inclusion and equity, and use diversity as a strength and not a crutch. And then just a reminder that Latinos are becoming around 50% of the state's population. The second most populated state in the United States is 50% Latino. So yes, every single issue in Texas is a Latino issue. We're not isolated from any issues. We are disproportionately impacted in some issue areas. But every single issue, every single thing that impacts Texans is impacting Latinos firsthand. And we're no longer a minority. We still see policies that minoritize us, but simply put, we're not a minority.
Yes, but they like to portray it that way, right?
Yes. So what you see in the headlines and media and who is in our leadership is not necessarily what Texas looks like on the ground. It's not.
Yeah. I think they like to portray Latinos in Texas like either undocumented, criminals, low-income people. Like, it's just like such a, awful stereotype. And, there's been families that have lived there for generations, right?
Yes, and I mean it's the entire spectrum from beginning to now and everything in between. So again, family members that have been here for over 100 years, and people that arrived yesterday, right? And everyone that came in between, people that are first, second, third generation, people that have different language proficiencies in English and in Spanish and indigenous languages, folks who have various legal statuses from undocumented to U.S. citizenships, but also green cards, asylum seekers, refugees. Like, we have every single type of profile that you can imagine is here in Texas, and they're Texan, and we need to embrace them as that.
So if we think about what you were saying about how populous the state is, what percentage of that population is Latino, Latinx, how is that representation in the legislature? Like, do we see it? Do you see more Latinos in policy, making policy, maybe at the state level or maybe at the local level? Certainly when I think...
We're not proportionally represented yet. We have probably about a third of the way to go in terms of that proportional representation at the state level, and then it varies locally. In Houston, we're around 45% of the city's population. We have one Latino city council member. And so recognizing that maps have been drawn, to really make it hard for Latinos to run and win. But I also want to credit the immense progress that we've seen in Texas over the past couple of decades. So we do have a fair share of Latino, Latina legislators and local leaders. And very proud that in 2018, we sent the first Texas Latina Congresswoman to DC, right? Again, after so many years and generations of Latinos being in Texas, we're starting to slowly roll out all of our first. And then really create that wave of engagement in the Latino population. It's also really important to note that the other demographic shift that we're seeing happen in Texas is that we're an extremely young state. A large portion of our population is under the age of 30, and a large portion of that population is Latino. And so I say we're 50%, you're going to see those numbers vastly increase over the next couple of decades, because it's just simply put, from an immigration standpoint, a birth rate standpoint, we are becoming a larger population. And we're alongside our Black community, which is we have more Black African Americans in the state of Texas than any other state. The Asian American population is the fastest growing population in Texas. And so as we're thinking about the issues that impact us, we also need to understand, like, what are these issues are not just Latino issues. They're also issues that other communities are also working through as well.
Yeah. And I mean, besides the obvious, that people always think, oh, Texas border stuff. And, all the conservatives are up in arms about the border all the time, saying that, this is a disaster or it's chaotic or whatever. Tell us about, some of the challenges that Latinos go through because of failed policy in Texas.
Yeah, absolutely. Just for folks out there, Texas has the largest portion of the U.S.-Mexico border, from El Paso, which the Mexico sister city is Ciudad Juarez, all the way down to Brownsville, McAllen, which is Reynosa, Tamaulipas on the Mexican side, and then other areas like Laredo towards the middle. And so it's It's quite a stretch of border, which means we have some concentrated urban border communities like El Paso, McAllen, Brownsville area, some more rural areas around the Laredo, and then everything in between along the way. And then you have that initial border, right, with 2 to 3 entry points. And then 90 miles north of that, you have another border checkpoint, of which a lot of folks, once they cross the first border undocumented, you can't cross the second checkpoint. And so do think about that sliver that exists across the border region of Texas and Mexico, where it's extremely under-resourced. We have lack of hospitals and clinics in these rural areas. We have a lot of unincorporated communities, what we call colonias, communities that are our neighborhoods, but don't really necessarily belong to a public entity like a city or a county. And so they're fighting for access to water and sewage treatment simply because they were never formally incorporated under a jurisdiction and struggle to even identify who the representatives are. Who are the public officials that need to be making sure they have access to some of the basic necessities that we take for granted, like water, sewage treatment, and then also when there's federal funding coming in or state funding, who is managing the distribution of those funds into these communities? And so it really is sometimes a whole nother world, a nation kind of caught it in between two big, amazing countries, and a lot of learned and taught resilience over the generations. My family, when they arrived from Mexico, arrived in the Rio Grande Valley, which is where I was born. And so I hold a lot of just love for those communities that first welcomed my parents and my family into the United States. And then just recognize that we need to do better. We need to do more. We can't just ostracize and want to isolate this community. It's not out of sight, out of mind at all. And again, we're seeing it, the state leaders just increasingly attack our border communities. Just the past month, we saw just so much state money go down the drain in an effort to send a message that we were protecting our border, and that was not the case. And so it's unfortunate that there's a lot of opportunity to have that strong binational culture and economy, but we use the border when it's convenient for us, and when it's not, we really do forget about the people that live along that.
Yeah, this is U.S. territory, people. People in the U.S. are living this way. And I know that I've heard and read much about the Rio Grande Valley. And, I've heard of people having to drive 2 hours to get to a hospital, to get medical care, or people that just have to drive to Mexico because they can't afford healthcare in Texas. This is the U.S., guys. These are taxpayers that are not getting access to these very common services. It's incredible.
I think Angelica is touching on many things. There is issues of climate injustice, right? Like if you have not clean water, not access to sewage, those are like disproportionate climate issues. That same border is crossing and splitting, causing ecological damage. That border before used to be historically, I think, many decades ago, a much more permeable area in which people would transition from one country to the other. That border crossed many families, many histories. They didn't cross it. They got crossed by it. But I also think about the consequences of what it means to have this kind of like no man's land, and who represents it, but also who polices it. Also, how do you have access? Like if I think of reproductive health, and Texas having one of the most kind of the harshest anti-abortion legislations that have passed in the last year or so. And what happens if you live in this space or in this area that is close to the border and you suddenly need to have access to reproductive health? And what does it mean to have to drive to another state? Who has the access to do that? How does that impact our community? So I appreciate you layering that all these issues are not just single issues, but that they are interconnected, and that they at multiple intersections affect our communities and continue to keep to keep certain populations in very precarious ways.
Yeah, and then just wanting to recognize that because of the nature of just how we view border security and threats, Border Customs Patrol has a lot of leeway and freedom. And the entire border region and the 80 to 90 miles from what we consider the border up until the security checkpoints. And so these are federal agents that really have a lot of freedom to patrol as they wish, to call people out if they're being suspicious, right? There's a lot of loose language that we've implemented into law that allows for a lot of agency on behalf of ICE in all of Texas, but particularly in the border regions. In 2017, Texas passed SB 4, which we named the Show Me Your Papers law, which really allowed local law enforcement, not just federal, but local law enforcement, to demand that someone show them that they are a U.S. citizen. And so parts of that's still in litigation, parts of that law is being challenged, but it really created this fear and trauma.
And profiling.
And even showing up to their it's clearly racial profiling. But people even just scared to show up to the hospital. What if somebody asked me for my ID, right? For even permanent residents and U.S. citizens to having to think about that, we would have to be prepared to showcase proof of U.S. citizenship or lawful residency. And so again, it's definitely a direct impact on our undocumented community, but it's a Latino issue. It's an issue for those in Texas who are considered othered, because we're at risk for being questioned, for having to prove more because we look, talk, present ourselves in a certain way. So that's just a huge issue that still continues to impact Texans. And then in terms of reproductive justice, absolutely. I mean, last year when we passed SB 8, which is named the Heartbeat Bill, which is people cannot legally obtain abortions after 6 weeks, which is most of the time, most women don't even know they're pregnant at that time. And with the strong possibility that Roe v. Wade would be overturned, then we're seeing Texas flat out ban all safe abortions. And so it's also really important to note that over the past couple of decades, I mean, this has been a touchy issue for Texans and our legislators for a really long time. And every single session, there's an attempt, sometimes very successfully, to defund or close down clinics that provide abortions. And so you're not shutting down abortion clinics, you're shutting down community clinics, which is where a lot of our family members might go get cancer screenings, preventative health care, family planning, teenage and adolescent health care. And so everyone likes to take one side or another on this issue that's very touchy, but at the end of the day, it was an issue that was impacting the health and the wellness of a lot of our community members. And so you shut down a clinic in rural Texas, you don't know when the next clinic is going to be. That's not an incentive for healthcare providers to move to Texas and provide healthcare. It's an issue on so many levels. And we've just made it out to be a very black and white issue, and that's just not the case at all. And so with the new abortion bill or abortion law that we see, yes, like there is not a lot of luxury for certain people to drive one state over, which is about 8 or 9, 10 hours. Especially when a lot of our southern states or Midwestern states are following in Texas steps and also passing their own abortion bans. And so Texas is starting to be very central to abortion ban states, and it's becoming increasingly hard for people having to travel to find appropriate care.
How, when you think about all these issues, what is the path forward? How are we organizing? What are the goals?
How do we get this resolved somehow? I see so many issues, and they're sad. But as we are 50% of the population in Texas, what is our path forward as Latinos?
Yeah, I mean, I think the end goal is that we really need to elect leadership and decision makers that are advocating for us, that are recognizing that Texas is a strong economy. So let's just talk about that. We're considered like one of the top global economies as we stand alone as a state. So resources and funds are there. Whether they get distributed as they should in terms of need and priority, that's just not the case that we see. And so we really need to have decision makers and agencies that recognize that. And ultimately, the path forward is that we as Latinos, we need to really recognize what we bring to the table and celebrate it. We just launched a campaign called Merecemos Mejor, We Deserve Better, because we know that we are just so central to Texas's culture and community and values and economy and workforce. We're overrepresented in the labor workforce. We're overrepresented in the essential labor workforce that kept Texas moving during the pandemic. There's no question about it. But then we tend to be overrepresented in issues that are negatively impacted us. Texas has the highest rate of uninsured people across all of the 50 states. Of our uninsured population, Latinos make up the majority of those uninsured folks. We have a very young state population. We have, we're one of the states that has the lowest allotted for public education. And so over and over again, we just have examples of how Latinos
probably even like parental leave, probably parental leave.
We don't have paid work leave. Again, we have an antiquated election and voting system, right? Systems that some states haven't used for the past 20, 30 years. And so what you see out there is on the headlines of what's happening in Texas. Sometimes it's a facade. We talk about election integrity and security, and that's just, that's happening as soon as other Texans as more Texans are starting to vote and get engaged. So the path forward is really that we educate our folks. And that they know what they're contributing to the state, that they feel powerful because we are, that it's coming from a point that we deserve better because we do more.
Yeah.
And we do it very willingly, and we do it very happily for our community and for our children or for our families. And we don't get that in return from the policies that we see being passed in Texas. Yeah. And so what this campaign is, it's really to celebrate our community and to name it and to say, listen, we've been here, we're going to continue to be here. And with that in line, we deserve to be equally represented and across all the issue areas. We deserve policies that are recognizing that we've been historically excluded, policies that have intentionally left our communities out of historical and funding, that we've been disproportionately impacted by natural disasters such as the pandemic, such as the Winter Storm Uri that happened last year, such as unfortunately the shootings that have been happening in Texas in the recent years. And so it's demanding better. And I always say this very carefully because Latinos, we're too proud sometimes. We're too proud to ask for more, but to really, again, center ourselves in we've been contributing so much since the start of Texas. And that's having a statewide impact, and it's having a national impact, right? And so the path forward is really to increase voter participation, not just for one election, but for every single election moving forward.
I mean, hard work is part of our, ethic, right? And we talked about this before. Latinos always equal to hard work, right? They're always hard workers.
Yeah, but I think that is very rooted on capitalism and extraction, and even thinking about our comprehension of. We think of asking for these resources, and it's almost like they're government handouts, and they are public services that we are
pay
all
for,
contributing to through our taxes.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think that messaging is so important to change that mentality, that it's just not like someone is giving you a handout. It's that these are things that you are buying with your
Medicare for all is not a handout. It's actually something that we are paying for.
And even in Texas, when we've done the analysis, if we expanded Medicaid expansion, it would bring money into our state. It's not even a break even. There's a net gain for us, for the entire state. not just for those that are impacted by not having insurance, healthcare insurance. And so it's like, why are we not using common sense? Why are we not looking at the data and the lived experiences of Texans to make these decisions? And so from all viewpoints, the economy, but then again, the lived experiences of people, there's so many opportunities to pass legislation that just makes sense for Texas.
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing this podcast for some time now, and to me, it feels like a lot of the sentiment that many Latinos around the country have is that they are just working in their own silo and not really connecting with the power of the numbers, right? Like they're not really getting how much power they have, because we have so many of us, and we are also very aligned in what we need and what we want. But it's like, I don't think that there's that connection. We haven't made that, connection in that web of Latinos across the country, in which we're like, all right, we're gonna all come together to fight for this cause, fight for us, because everybody's so focused on just like their own lives and themselves. And it's like this, I think that part of the engagement comes from realizing that power of the numbers and the power that we can have if we all come together and do, Ceci's gonna say it's all part of the systems of oppression. I know you're gonna say that.
It's gonna be like, you're just describing capitalism, and I was just thinking, like, we are, the system is made to keep you tired, exhausted, all the things that we as citizens, we cannot recover from one tragedy. This podcast is being recorded a day after probably the largest school shooting since the Sandy Hook shooting. So thank you, Angelica, for holding this space with us in this difficult time for the community, for you. But those are things that we can barely, it's like if you imagine swimming, it's like we don't have our nose above the water. Sometimes we put it up and then we hold some breath and go back underwater, and so of course we are barely keeping ourselves alive, barely surviving. So how can we think about really community building, solidarity economies, of really thinking of good? And Latinos have, and you've mentioned how the other populations of folks of color are growing in the state, Black, Asian, Native American probably. And I'm thinking there has been a strong coalitions probably in Texas, and we don't hear about these webs of support. We don't hear about it because the goal is to keep us divided, to focus in our own little, survival, to find the energy, the time, the strength to really thrive together. That's a very thoughtful, long game strategy of wielding power.
Yeah, and I think again, the community organizing is just so important. I know we've been saying since 2020 we're not a monolith in terms of the Latino community, and that's definitely the case in Texas. I think, and I say that where we have shared values and experiences, but the diversity in terms of the Latino community that exists in Texas is also really vast. Again, we've mentioned the spectrum of people being here for one generation versus 4 or 5. The language diversity that exists. But then also in terms of country of origin and nationality. So we love to say, we know that Mexican Americans make a large portion of the Latino community in Texas. But we have a growing population of folks from Colombia, from Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, from the Caribbean, from Puerto Rico, from the Dominican. It goes on and on and on. And so I think organizations like Mi Familia Vota, we need to be on the ground to really see those folks and listen to them and understand them, because we are very stubborn, somos tercos, and so sometimes we like to say oh no, that's an issue for you, not for me. But at the end of the day, we're living in this under the same state leadership, under the same system. And yes, we credit a lot of our hard work ethic to the successes that we have. But it still does feel like sometimes there's like just this cloud of doom constantly on the horizon. But what I've seen through Mi Familia Vota and our community organizing is when people come together and share those stories and share what they want for their children and for their families, and talk about, the struggles that they've been through, but then the successes, and celebrate and cry and laugh together, then it's a whole different mentality. And so I do think it's going to require a cultural shift in how we organize with Latino communities in Texas, to recognize that even within ourselves, that we're not being exclusive, or we're not making assumptions of other people, but really recognizing, again, we're under the same umbrella. And sometimes we just, we have the same experiences, but our perceptions might be different. And to really just start breaking down a lot of these preconceived notions that we might have with one another.
One question for you. Are you seeing a more diverse kind of candidates? Like, how is the political landscape of candidates growing, diversifying? What is emerging from this very diverse pool of, from this community?
Yeah, I would say it's a yes and no. Yes, we're seeing more candidate diversity, not just in the Latino community, but a lot of the other communities in Texas. And I'll come back to why yes, but the no part is because, we just went through a very brutal redistricting session in Texas, where congressional state legislators maps and then our State Board of Education maps just completely, or very, very much so, disregarded the Latino population. And so they were drawn out in a way that we didn't gain a lot of Latino opportunity districts. Texas should have gained 3 districts with the census count. There's been reports saying that a large portion of Texans were undercounted. So we ultimately gained 2 congressional districts. Had we gained 3, it should have been very likely that 2 of those 3 districts, congressional districts, should have been Latino opportunity zones, simply because the way our population expanded in some of the urban and suburban areas. And what we saw were maps drawn out on partisan scales, where one district was drawn out for white Democrats to win in, and one district was drawn out for white Republicans to win in. And so issues that should not be partisan end up becoming partisan very quickly in Texas because of our political.
Yeah.
And the people that end up losing are just your everyday Texans who simply just need resources to thrive. And so that was really upsetting to see. But yes, we have an increasing number of candidates throwing their hat in from local to state levels, and that's really exciting. And so we're building out a Latino leadership pipeline in Texas that we should be very proud of. And it's going to require even more investment in this current generation of candidates, so they're not just running, but they're winning, and they're being held accountable by the community that voted them in. So again, these issues shouldn't be partisan. For Mi Familia Vota, success does not mean one party being more in control than the other. It means that our communities can hold their elected officials accountable, and that we see increase of quality of life because great candidates were voted in. And so it really is going to take these generational shifts to make sure that we are well prepared to have diverse candidate pools that can be successful in winning and then passing legislation that is good for
but even though Texas has been infamously red forever, I've noticed that there's been some districts that have been turning blue, right? So I feel like there's some hope, in terms of, things for change in Texas, don't you think?
Oh, no, I definitely think we have a lot of room for hope. And, pre-2020, we averaged in presidential elections around 40 to 48% of the electorate voting. So, and that's the electorate. Those are registered voters. And so our elected officials were voted in by less than half of the eligible voting population. And so organizers like to say we're not a red state, we were a non-voting state.
Interesting.
and you can name a list of reasons why people were not engaging in voting, from just flat out voter suppression to a feeling of hopelessness and disengagement, because again, we struggle sometimes to see our victories. And so that's changing, absolutely. Again, in the aftermath of 2020, we had more Latinas vote than ever before. And we know that we bring out the rest of our community. So we're going to see an upward trend in that. We had more Latino youth vote in 2020. And that's what we want. We want to continue seeing that upward trend in 2022. We're facing, again, another voter suppression law that's just making it harder and confusing. I would say voter confusion is voter suppression. And so that's where we are in Texas also when it comes to our voting and election laws. And so there's definitely hope there. And we know when there's another attack on us, it's probably because we've been doing pretty good, because we've been seeing increases, right? And so we take it as a compliment. We find the silver lining in it. I know that we're going to fight back, whether it's in litigation, whether it's in advocacy and organizing. But we see so much hope on the horizon. We see so many opportunities for more folks to get involved.
Yeah. And so you just said it, right? So more folks to get involved. Like, how can people listening and that live in Texas get involved? How can?
If you're in Houston or in Texas, we would love to have you on the ground with us doing voter registration. As we get closer to the elections, we're building up our canvassing teams, folks that are from the community, talking to the rest of their community members. It's really going to take this large
village,
just like force, force, and we're slowly starting to see, or I see the Latino community coming together, from folks that are more on the political side to folks that are more on the organizing side. Like, we're all strategizing and thinking together, and it's like we can't carry this burden by ourselves. The organizing community in Texas is small, and we just know it can't just be us. We need to bring more people to the table. We need more people talking about elections and the terminology that they use, that they feel comfortable with the values that they are prioritizing, with the issues that are important to them. It's not just one singular message. It's the message of all Texans talking about why good leadership is so necessary for our lives. And then if you're not in Houston or in Dallas, still hit us up. We want folks they need to get trained on voter registration, or how to talk about elections, or how to talk about certain issues. Let us know, because we need ambassadors to be in every single corner of Texas. There's 254 counties in Texas, and there's Latinos in every single county, from the urban areas, suburban, and rural. We're in every single part of Texas, in every single corner. And so we want to make sure that even the Latinos that are not in our Houston and Dallas areas, that you don't feel alone, that you don't feel like there's not a community that you can get connected to, because we're very much aware of the resources that we also need to be providing for our folks out there.
So are there any dates that Texan citizens should be keeping in mind that they should be registered for? Something
that's a great question. Unfortunately, in the state of Texas, you have to get registered to vote 30 days before the upcoming election. If you're not already registered, just need to make sure. If you're already registered, don't worry about it. You haven't moved, don't worry about it. Just have to make sure your voter registration is up to date and active at least 30 days before the election. This year, I believe that falls on October 11th. And election day, along with the rest of the country, is going to be November 8th. That Tuesday in November. It's a big one for Texas. Some of the big positions that we will see on our ballot is the governor of Texas. I hope that everyone across the nation is paying really close attention to that race. It's a high stakes race. We will also have other positions like lieutenant governor up for re-election. If you're not familiar with what a lieutenant governor does, they have almost as much power as a governor, and they decide a lot of our legislative agenda. So this is a person that really makes it or break it when we're looking at some of the state policies that Texas is passing. So governor, lieutenant governor, and our attorney general, again, a really strong and powerful position in the state of Texas. If again, if you care about anything, whether it be environmental justice, reproductive health, education, health, wellness, how you're going to keep the lights on in the next storm, you need to vote for these 3 positions. You need to find out who the incumbents and the candidates are, and reach out to them, to reach out to their campaigns, ask them questions, make them work for your vote. I think it's really important that, again, we're demanding more.
You pay for them to sit there.
Absolutely. And then in everyone's local community, you're going to see positions like state representatives and state senators. Again, a lot of the issues we've been talking about, they go through our state leadership. And so these are positions that carry a lot of weight. I love to bring up our county judges. In Texas, the county judges serve as the executives of the county. In my home county of Harris County, Harris County Judge Lina Hidalgo represents 5.4 million people. Yeah. It's a lot of power. It's a very important position. And I always say, we didn't see state leadership step up during the pandemic as much as I would have liked. So our county leadership was that next level of support, and they had to pass local policies to provide relief. So our county positions are really important. Our congressional positions are also really important. And so we say every election is so important. It's because it's true. But in the state of Texas, we cannot afford to sit out on elections. I think what happened in Uvalde this week is just a reminder of that. And we keep getting reminders, and we don't want to get any more reminders of that.
So if you want to learn more about Mi Familia Vota, their Twitter handle is @Mi Familia Vota. And you reach out to them if you want to get involved in the ground stuff, which sounds really fun and very impactful. And please register to vote. Those guys, your taxes go towards them working for you. And we can't just let them off the hook. They have to be accountable for keeping the things that you want going. So please register to vote. It's really important. I know people think that it doesn't matter or whatever. Not true. I do this for a living. Angelica does this for a living. We know.
And take someone with you, right? Let's not make it boring. Let's not make it confusing. The first time I voted, I didn't know what I was doing. And I didn't know early voting existed. There's early voting out, by the way. In Texas, too, we have 2 weeks of early voting, and then we have election day. I walked into the booth, and I didn't recognize people on the ballot except for the presidential election that I was voting in, right? I was lost, confused, and lonely, and I said, this is not for me. And that just was that's so not the case. So take someone with you, make a celebration out of it, create community around this. It's a powerful thing, but we've been taught to put our heads down, not say anything, or we've been taught that it's some bureaucratic thing that only a certain population does. And it's like, no, we can bring our own spin into this. We can make it our own thing, and we can be proud to do it, because the more people that we engage in this process, the more that we're going to see state leadership and elected officials represent us and pass policies that support us.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much, Angelica.
Thank you.
We are out of time. If you want to, like I said, @Mi Familia Vota Twitter handle, and if you want to get in touch with us, if you have any questions about anything that we said today, you can reach us at Latinx YC Pod on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. And you can also email me, Clem, at latinxycpod.com. And if you like this podcast, please share it with your friends. If you live in Texas, please share it with your friends. And give us a review. Give us a rating if you hate it or you love it.
Or recommendations.
We'd like to hear from you anyway. We love to hear from everyone that has said that they have issues with our podcast. We want to hear that too, because this is a conversation. We're not just trying to impose things on people. We want to hear everybody's opinion, and everybody's opinion is very valued. So thank you so much, Angelica, and good luck with all these efforts, and I want to hear back on how it went after elections. And thanks everyone out there. Welcome to season 4. We have some great guests coming, lots of ideas in the works, and see you next episode.